In this episode, we're going to teach you how to move your team in a more spiritual direction. How can you move beyond just making music together or doing life together to actually intentionally disciple your team members? What does discipleship look like day to day? And how can we actually set goals for our team's spiritual growth and development? We're going to talk about all that and more. Enjoy this episode.
Hey guys, today I welcome back Alex and Fejian to the show. Alex is a worship leader, songwriter, producer, and pastor. He's the man behind worshipministrytraining.com. He's on staff at Calvary Chapel South Bay in Los Angeles. Alex, welcome back, man. Thanks for hanging out.
Thanks, Carl. I am so glad to be with you again. You are one of my favorite podcasters and interviews and guests. When you're on my podcast, you always bring the gold. So glad to be with you.
Thanks so much, man. So still living in Los Angeles, man. Still toughing it out over there. Okay.
Yeah, the weather is pretty harsh, but yeah, someone's got it. Someone's got to live it hard.
Yeah, I hear that, man. So give me an update on worship ministry training and some of the resources that you provide over there.
Sure, thanks. Yeah, so worship ministry training, if people don't know, it is a podcast that has been around for 8 years, probably about as long as yours, Carl. And in, a couple years ago, we started selling courses. And then this past June 2022, we launched a full-on academy. So we've got courses, live training, exclusive podcast interviews. But I think the thing that people are finding most helpful are like all the done-for-you resources. So we basically have created an audition process, an onboarding process, templates, team devos that worship leaders can use. Basically, we give worship leaders all the tools and the training they need so that they can just focus on discipling their team. So that's all at worshipministrytraining.com. It's $1 to try for 15 days so people can test it out. So yeah, that's what I've been up to. It's been a lot of work, but it's been fun.
Yeah, man, you've been working hard. So give me a kind of a temperature check of worship leaders in general. You talk to a lot of worship leaders in the space. Kind of give me, what are they feeling? What are some of the things that you're hearing and seeing in the trenches?
Yeah, so I think coming out of the pandemic, it feels weird to say that because it feels pretty far removed, but I think it was such a big disruption that the effects are going to be felt for years. And I feel like coming out of that pandemic, a lot of worship leaders lost team members. People left to different churches. People stopped going to church, or they just haven't come back to their church or whatever. I don't know. They don't feel safe still. So a lot of worship leaders are operating with very thin teams, thin volunteer teams. And so they're scrambling for musicians, or they're hiring outside musicians, or they're calling their friends, and friends are coming from other churches. And so there's a lack of team members. And then also the team members who are still around are less committed than previously. So there's a lot more flakiness and a lot less drive and desire to invest. And so worship leaders are kind of doing the best they can with what they have. And hopefully, if they're a proactive leader, they're rebuilding their teams in this season. And so I would say, and you probably see this as well, but it's a season of rebuilding. And I would just encourage anyone listening who is in that state where, it feels thin, just focus on strengthening relational bonds with your current team members, reestablish the culture, reestablish the expectations, and then actively go out and recruit new team members. Get in the hallways, get in the lobby, get in the pews after service, and just start talking to people, because we really need to rebuild into something new, because what was old is gone,
Yeah, I talked to a lot of people that too, and probably the last 6 months or so hasn't been that bad. But if I'll go to conferences, people will ask me, "How do we get our volunteers back?" And I'm like, at this point, they're not coming back. You need to you need to start fresh and start a new team if that's the case. So, all right. So I want to chat about something that we're both really passionate about, and as I've gone through your notes, man, I just get really excited about this topic, and that is that music is the tool. Music is not the end all be all. That discipleship is the goal, and so we need to make sure that it is the goal when it comes to production, when it comes to leading worship and all that at our church. So, kind of set me up here. Why is music a tool and not the point?
Yeah, so I think I did this talk at the Loop Community Worship Innovators Conference, and the reason I felt burdened to do it is because looking at the modern worship landscape of like what it is that we think we're supposed to be about and what it is that we think we're supposed to be doing. I'm just like confused. Like, how did we get here to where everybody's just copycatting everybody else? And obviously the internet and YouTube and Instagram all plays into that. But I think if you zoom out a little bit, there's a much bigger problem going on, which is worship leaders have never been discipled as to what it means to be a church leader. So like when they get hired on staff, they're just like handed a microphone and they're like, hey, here you go, do the thing. What thing? Like, what am I supposed to do? You know, like nobody, the pastor didn't disciple me. I didn't go through any program. I was just good at guitar and singing. And so they gave me a ministry. And so I'm like, oh my gosh, what am I supposed to do? So I start looking around online and I see this ministry and this church and I listen to this album and I start to learn. My education just comes from looking around on the internet. And what do you see on the internet other than just lots of cool production, lots of cool lights, people doing funny thing with their hands, you know, cool songwriting, cool bands, even though it all kind of sounds the same, right? And it's just like, I guess that's what I'm supposed to do, right? And so I'm going to do that at my church. But like, I think there's this fundamental layer that we need to peel the onion back down to the core and be like, okay, what is this about? What is ministry about? It's not about the songs. Songs are the tool. It's about making disciples. And I just feel like we're in a weird point in time in the modern church, in the American church at least, and we need to really like go back to the basics. And look, I'm at a church. We have all the bells and whistles. We have all the big stuff. We have all the big tech, you know, but it's like, that's not what it's about. And I think a lot of worship leaders set their eyes on that as success. And they say, if I can look like that, if I can sound like that, then I will be successful. But what if Jesus isn't measuring that as success? He's measuring a completely different metric. And I believe he actually is. And so that's kind of the question that I'm asking right now. Like, what is the metric? Well, I think I already know the answer, but we can get into it later.
Yeah. And so I want to frame this conversation in that yes, we want our worship experiences to go well. Yes, we want them to be excellent. You know, it's not bad necessarily to have gear and tech and tools and instruments, whatever we may need sometimes or even want sometimes. So how do we balance that, but also keeping the main thing? So yeah. Let's just kind of dive in some more. So talk to me about how Jesus never said to make music or art, that all he talked about was making disciples.
Right. Well, okay. Let's talk about it. Yeah, so I don't want to say we shouldn't make art, because the Bible commands us to make art. The tabernacle is made of like amazing, you know, gold and purple linen and like really fancy material made by expert craftsmen and done beautifully. And the Bible commands us to make music. So I'm not saying we shouldn't make music. I'm just saying when Jesus, his last command to his disciples when he was on the planet before he ascended was go and make disciples of all nations. Okay, so his last thing, the main thing he wants us to do now that he's not on the planet is make disciples. But I think what happens is worship leaders think we're supposed to make music. We're not supposed to make music. We're supposed to make disciples. We are supposed to make music, but it's not the end all. It's not the be all. It's not the thing. It's like the tool that we should be using to accomplish what Jesus actually told us to accomplish, which is make disciples. So I just think what happens when worship leaders see excellence and put excellence as the standard is, and again, I'm all for excellence. We are supposed to be excellent. But when excellence is the standard and they're like, I have to look like that and sound like that in order to be successful, then what happens is they feel unsuccessful when they're at a small church that can't afford any of that stuff.
Right.
So they're like, oh my gosh, like I'll never be successful as a worship leader because I can't look like that and I can't sound like that. And I'm just saying, whoa, wait a minute. That has nothing to do with success in God's eyes. Success is doing the best you can with what you have. That's the definition of excellence that I like to use. Doing the best you can with what you have at your disposal right now and making disciples. So if the people on your team look more like Jesus this year because they've been in your ministry than they were last year, then you have been successful. And that's kind of all I'm putting forth is like, we can do all the tech and we can do all of the great production and we can do all of the cool songwriting and the fancy stages. And if we make disciples while we're doing all that, great. But what I see is a lot of people figure out how to make great music, but they don't make disciples. And I'm saying God does not care about that ministry. So like you could get it all right on the external side of things, but you miss the heart and God is not impressed or pleased. Right. And so I think it's important that we aim to do both, that we say we're going to be excellent because excellence honors God, but we're also going to make sure that we are actively pouring into, praying for, studying scripture with our volunteers. And I just see a lot of churches and a lot of worship ministries or even production where like the focus is how cool can we be, not how godly can we help our people become. And I'm just saying, like, let's not think that means that is not success, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, good word. All right, so walk that out practically. What are some ways that we can make discipleship our primary goal? You know, sometimes that it fleshes out with what we, as the leader, are intentional about. And so if all we're talking about is, you know, get that, make sure that you're hitting the right note and make sure I make sure not that button. Like if that's what's important to us, then that's that could be replicated. And so how should we be intentional about making discipleship our number one?
Yeah. Well, I think you're right. As the leader, like what we prioritize, it filters down to the team, and what we talk about first is what the team assumes is important, right? And so I think watching our words is important. Like if the first thing is, let's say we have a great worship service, the church is super engaged, like all the, whatever. But like there's one person hit one wrong button or went to the wrong slide. And like if the first thing out of our mouth was, you hit the wrong button, instead of, did you see how impacted the people were? Did you see how engaged they were? Did you see how passionately they were praising Jesus? That should be the first comment. You can follow up with like, hey, make sure we hit this button on this part. Like you can follow up with that. But if the first words are, the music was bad or this happened or this transition was wonky or whatever, then we're going to set the precedent for the team to think that that's what we care about. So that's one thing. The other thing is it's not really hard to make discipleship and spiritual like conversation important in your ministry. It's not hard to do. We just have to be intentional all the time to make sure we're having spiritual conversations, make sure we are reading scripture with our teams, make sure we are, praying with our teams and asking our team members how they're doing spiritually or where they're struggling or where it's really not hard to do. But my question is, are leaders actually doing it, or are we just showing up and running the show? You know what I mean? Because Jesus says, take away from me the noise of your songs. I don't care, or God does in the Old Testament in Amos chapter 5. So he's not impressed with our shows. He's not impressed with us executing everything. He's impressed if we love like he does, and that we look like him, and that we help our team members look like him. That is it. And so I just would say, make sure that you're integrating spiritual truths into everything that you're doing, because I can turn just like Jesus with the woman at the well, turn the conversation spiritual. I can do that with button pushing. I can do that with electric guitar playing. I can do that with drumming. But it's up to me as the leader to make those conversations steer in the direction of like a biblical truth underneath why we should play excellently, a biblical truth underneath why we should polish our cymbals, a biblical truth underneath why we should eliminate distractions on the stage. Like you can easily find, if you're a biblically literate leader, you can easily find biblical truths to bolster everything that you're telling your team to do on a practical level, right? But now it makes them want to do it because they understand why it's important to God and why it's good for their soul. So it's just infusing those spiritual conversations into the practical, right? So that would be my answer.
So how do you start with you? How do we start with ourselves? What are some practices that you've put in place to make sure that your heart is right before you lead your team?
Oh, well, it's the boring answers of spiritual disciplines of like, are you in the word every day? Like our church has a Bible reading plan. I make sure I read every day. Like I don't miss. Pretty much I haven't missed for like 2 years. I mean, maybe I missed 1 or 2 days over the last 2 years, but I like go back and catch up. So just like saturating yourself in the word, and then being in prayer and being accountable to other people. And yeah, all the boring stuff that everybody knows, and so, and that's a good point, Carl, because you can't lead people to where you haven't been. And so if you're not walking with passion for the Lord, if all you watch are YouTube videos about LED screens and you never read about God or read books that fuel your faith, then you have a problem. Not you, Carl, but it's like, but I do see so many worship leaders. I mean, I have problems, trust me, but I do see so many worship leaders who like, they watch all the songwriting stuff or all the church tech YouTube videos and all the church this, and it's like, those are cool videos, but like, I feel like our focus has moved off of God and onto like this cool, flashy stuff. And I feel like I sound like an old man now, Carl. but
you're right. And even though sometimes we know what we need to do to grow in our faith, sometimes we don't. We get lax. It's the first thing to go sometimes, and so we just to be disciplined with ourselves. Okay, so how do you explain that to your philosophy here that discipleship is first? How do you explain that to senior leadership? Now, if you put it into those words, it will resonate, but I think with a senior pastor. However, if we get to Sunday and something goes majorly wrong, or there's a lot of mistakes, or whatever, I guess I should say, how do you explain to your leadership that your number one goal is discipleship, and reiterate that and get their buy-in?
Right, because I guess what you're kind of hinting at underneath the radar is like sometimes senior leaders care more about that the service goes flawless and is executed with perfection more than is my worship leader or production leader actually discipling his team.
Right.
Which is a sad state of reality if our senior pastors like would rather have the former than the latter, right? Yeah. It's like, oh no.
Which I don't know if they'd say that out loud, but sometimes it can be expressed.
Yeah.
In the moment.
And to be clear, like Carl is an excellent person, and I love to try to do absolutely everything I do with excellence. I obsess over the micro details. I care about like the tiniest little nuances of something being perfect and executed well and beautifully. Even right now, as we're talking, I'm thinking about my answers aren't super clear because it's my afternoon brain slump time period. Yeah. And I'm like, oh man. And it's like, I want to do my very best. And so I want everybody to hear very clearly what I'm saying. We should do our very best, and we should seek to be excellent, and we should seek to not make mistakes and eliminate distractions. I have a Instagram reel that I recently posted that says like, the primary job of the worship leader is to point people to Jesus and remove as many distractions as humanly possible. So point people to Jesus and remove as many distractions as humanly possible. And we do that by being excellent, by nailing our parts, and by playing with simplicity and all these things that I teach in the Worship Ministry Training Academy. But I'm just saying we have to make sure that while we're pursuing excellence, we are not losing the spiritual life of our team. It's basically, we don't want to sacrifice the spiritual life of our team on the altar of excellence, right? Because that is not pleasing to God. So we have to hold them in tandem, hand in hand, and say, we're going to in parallel, move these things forward together. We're going to grow in excellence and production and musicality, and we're going to grow in spirituality. Because if you leave spirituality in the dust, or if you execute a flawless service, but you yell at your team in the back because they didn't do something right, then you're failing as a minister of the gospel. You know what I mean? So I wouldn't tell my senior pastor, hey, I'm going to let things start to suck because I want to focus on spirituality. To me, that's not spirituality. Spirituality is doing our best. So it's like, we are supposed to be excellent. That is spirituality. So again, I don't want people to hear me saying like, let's just all go stink. That's very uninspiring. Right. And that's not honoring to God. But it is, while we execute with excellence, let's not forget to disciple and pastor and shepherd and care for and teach and train our people in God's word, and all those things. That's the only thing I'm saying. Because I remember I did an interview with Matt Redman, like, I don't know, it must have been like 4 or 5 years ago now. And he said, I go to a lot of churches and I tour a lot all over the world. He's like, we're really good at making the service great, but we're not really good at being nice to each other. And I was like, man, like that is so simply said, but like that just shows me something's off in the church, that like we've prioritized the show over the people, and that's wrong, So
yeah, so good. Such a good point. All right. So if I'm the senior leader, let's flip that. If I'm the senior leader, how can I give you leeway? How can I encourage? How can I lift you up in order to make sure that we are doing number one? We are discipling people.
Yeah, I would say make sure there's margin in your worship leader's life or in your production leader's life to spend time discipling his, whether that means it's like, hey, I want you to make sure once a week you're taking someone out to coffee and the church is going to cover that, right? Or, hey, I want you, worship leader, to, if I'm the senior pastor, like, hey, worship leader, I want you to have the team over to your house once a month. We're going to cover the cost of pizza for you guys. And, whatever, you can have the next Monday morning off or whatever. Like, equip your worship leader with the time and the margin and the finances to be able to disciple their team. Yeah. I just recently released, Carl, a worship team Devo. It's $20. Like, if I was it's 52 weeks. It's one for every week. It's got a scripture, a summary, discussion questions, and a closing prayer, right? It's worshipteamdevos.com if anyone cares. Like, if I was the senior pastor, I would buy those right now and be like, worship leader, you must read this with your team every week. You know what I mean? Like, it's such a simple win. And so, yeah, I think that's a great question, Carl. And hopefully any senior leaders listening will take that to heart.
Okay. So what are some other practical ways? Do you have some other things that you do with your team to make sure that people are number one? People are the point. We've walked through a few, but anything else come to mind as far as maybe it could be Sunday. It could be like you were saying, coffees and things like that. But what are some other practical ways to make sure that people are at the forefront?
Yeah, I think, a lot of it has to do with using your time well when you're with your people. So like, I always try to have at least 1 or 2 deep, serious, encouraging, prayerful conversations with someone on my team every single Sunday. Because at our church, we're there for 3 services, from like 6 a.m. to or 6:30 a.m. to like 2 p.m. Right. So there's a lot of downtime in between. And like, I should not just sit back there with my smartphone scrolling, or, what I should, as the leader, intentionally use that time and space to connect with someone on my team, find out what's going on in their life, find out how I can pray for them, and actually stop and pray. Being intentional with that Sunday morning time, I think, is crucial. And then, like I said, just turning everything into a spiritual conversation, or not that it always, look, that's awkward. People like that are awkward. I'm not saying like everything has to be 100% of the time spiritual, but like, you should pepper it in pretty often. So if I'm setting up the stage with Johnny, he's 16 years old and he's learning about how to plug in an XLR cable, like, I'm going to teach him how to run that cable really clean and really like excellently, and explain like why details matter to God, and why, teach him about diligence. So it's just like, it's not just doing the thing, but it's doing the thing to teach a spiritual lesson. And again, I don't want people to hear me saying like, you always have to do the spiritual lesson or you're failing, because that's awkward. But let's make sure that we are doing some of that, because at the end of the day, the only thing God's going to ask us when we get to heaven is, did you help these people love me more? That's it. That's it.
Good. Now, I love in your notes how you talk about, just reminders to ourselves that you're not a musician, you're a minister, that you're not a song leader, you're a shepherd. And I've been teaching that for years, that the secret sauce is pastoring your people. I come at it from a production standpoint, that I've heard a lot of production guys say, "Oh, I'm not a pastor." Yes, buddy, you are. Yes, you are. Yeah. If you are a church staff member leading people, you are a pastor through and through. And so to put people, number one, that our primary focus is to be there to help people look more like Jesus. So good.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So we measure what we move, right? Okay. So how do you measure? And I'll give you an example of what I did. But I'm going to ask you, how do you measure spiritual growth? So one thing I did, I want to get your opinion on it, is I would have a spreadsheet, and I would literally have like the path of a Christian. Okay, salvation, baptism, small group. Have they been on a mission trip? Are they growing in their, like, at least, I mean, I don't know their heart. God's working on them, but at least there's some markers and fruit that I could probably notate. And when I did that, one thing I was amazed to find is that some people have not actually made a decision for Christ. Or some people had not taken a step of baptism. You almost kind of assume if they're already volunteering, they're already in, they've kind of walked through, the first steps of a believer. And what I found when I tracked it is a lot of them, or some hadn't. And so I got to encourage that, and to take that next step, and we got to celebrate that as a team. So that was kind of cool. So how do you track or kind of be the fruit inspector on spiritual growth?
That's funny. Did you also track how many times they cussed each Sunday? No, I'm just kidding.
Well, I didn't want to, because I didn't want them judging me the same. No, I'm just kidding.
Exactly. I'm kidding. It's funny. I saw this question and I actually wrote, it's hard. You can't measure the fruit of the Spirit on a spreadsheet, but I love that you did it.
Yeah. But it's not, I mean, fruits of the Spirit, there's definitely like you see that in their personality and stuff. Yeah. I'm more talking about major steps in the life of a believer, your salvation, baptism. Are they in a small group? Maybe it could just be one that you measure. Are you plugged into a small group? To help them with that. But you're right. It's not always measurable, and it's very vague, very vague. But anyway,
I actually love that you were that intentional to do that. That's like next level awesome. So yeah, I think the fruit of the Spirit is hard to measure, but you can see it in your team, especially you can see it in your team as a whole. And you can just simply use the fruits of the Spirit as your evaluation metric, like looking at your team. Does your team exude love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, right? When they talk about what movies they watched, would those movies qualify as good? Because one of the fruits of the Spirit is goodness, right? When they talk about the shows they watch, when you see what they're scrolling past on their Instagram, because I mean, that's what people do in between services. They're on their phones, right? Sadly. So are they exercising self-control and saying no to sin? Like a couple years before the pandemic, I had a lot of young people on my team, and I was actually really surprised how okay they were with certain activities that to me, it's very clear in scripture is sin, but they didn't even know that those things were wrong, and like it would slip out in between services, and I'm like, wait, what? Like, wait, what's going on? Or you watched what? And again, I feel like this old curmudgeon guy right now as I'm talking. But what's that?
I was just gonna. Me too. Like and I don't want to. We joke about it, but I don't mind people being a fruit inspector in my life, and so I don't want us to come across as being super judgy on everybody. Right. That's not what we're talking about here. I think it's just the bottom line is, are we being intentional in each other's life when it comes to growing in our faith?
Yeah. And when you hear those conversations, you don't let it slide. Like you don't go like you that's your opportunity to pastor, right? It's like, wait, hold on. Like you watched that movie on Netflix that's like full of sex, like full of like nudity, like you don't do it in front of everybody, but you're like, you can the next week or call them, grab coffee, but like, hey, like I heard this, but then you don't want your team to like start to like hide things from you. And that's where you have to do the hard work of pastoring, where you're like, you have to help them see that like, hey, this is harmful for you, So anyway, yeah, I think we can't measure it, but we can sense it. We can sense that the people are growing in their faith. Like I had one girl on the team, she was dating a non-Christian, She was playing, I don't want to say too many details, but she has grown a lot in 3 years, right? Because we've just been like, she shows up every week or most weeks, and there's conversation and there's encouragement and there's prayer and because of the long, steadfast work of shepherding and encouraging and not judging, because we could have judged her right out of the group, right? But it's like you got to like play the long game with people and love them and let the Lord work on them. But there's been so much growth in her life because our team cares about the spiritual things, so yeah.
Good. I hope people hear our heart today, that it's really about caring for people. All right. I have some rapid fire for you before you leave. Can I hit you with 5 rapid fire questions?
Oh gosh.
All right, here we go. All right, number 1, this isn't too hard. Who is your favorite Christian music artist of the last 20 years? You can name a few if you want.
20 years? Wow, I really have enjoyed...
We're old, me and you, so...
Yeah. I really have enjoyed Brandon Lake's stuff. I think it's fresh, and his production, if you listen to his full albums, it's very artistic and unique and not cookie cutter, and I appreciate that.
Yeah, good. All right, what's one quick story of discipleship from your ministry where you've seen an example of someone growing in their faith more than just learning songs?
Oh, well,
maybe you just shared that.
Yeah, that one was one that came to mind. And then there are a couple young worship leaders who were not worship leaders when they started on the team, and now they are full-fledged, doing an amazing job, worship leading and shepherding and discipling the people around them. And it's really cool because they started as drummers and now they're like youth worship leaders and they're actually discipling people. So that's been cool.
Yeah, nice. All right. What is a productivity tool that you can't live without as a worship leader at your church?
Oh my gosh. Well, Planning Center is the obvious one as a worship leader, but for me personally, the Michael Hyatt Full Focus Planner was a game changer for me. I've used it for the last 4 years, and it made me 100 times more productive and successful than I was before using it. So
good one. So the major thing that I learned from Michael Hyatt, so I read his book Platform, when I first started 1230. And one of the major things that I learned from him is to use one piece of content in as many ways as you possibly can.
I'm finally starting to do that too.
It's game changing. I'm probably giving away the secret sauce here, but one piece of content can be a workshop, a blog post, a podcast, 15 tweets, then an email, and then a book, and then as many different ways as you can use it. All right. So number 4, what is the most attractive character trait a worship leader should possess?
I was going to say joy, but I think it's not a character trait, but maybe it is welcome. Being welcoming is the number one character trait of a good worship leader. You make people feel connected to you. You make people feel invited in and cared for, and they want to be around you and they want to follow you.
Good. All right. Last one. What is one of the most common challenges that worship leaders face?
Keeping our hearts fresh, because when you do it over and over and over and over, it just becomes a routine, and it's hard you can learn how to script it, and you can learn, what to say and what to pray and what to play. But how do we make sure that it doesn't turn stale and rotten? So, that's hard.
Good. Well, man, tell us how we can keep up with you, how we can take some of your courses and learn about your resources.
Yeah, thanks so much, Carl, for what you do and for inviting me on to be with your people. Worshipministrytraining.com is the number one place to go. It has all the social links and everything, and they can try out the courses, get all the resources, the team devos and everything for $1 for 15 days. So worshipministrytraining.com.
Yeah, awesome. Well, man, it's been such a pleasure getting to know you over the years. I mean, we probably hooked up earlier on in our ministry and did a podcast early on years ago. And so, man, it's just been a pleasure just kind of connecting with you over the years. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Carl. Thanks, everybody. Every once in a while, I want to highlight one of our amazing Academy students and share how God has used the Academy to impact them, encourage them, and strengthen their ministry. So enjoy this quick testimonial from one of our students.
First of all, I've never been on a worship team before. I was in choir at my old private school when I was like elementary level. So it had been a hot minute. I started working at the school that's connected to a church, and I started giving out piano lessons, which got me onto the worship team. And then the worship leader dissipated. And then within a month, they're like, hey, guess what? You're it. Oh, okay. I went from piano teacher to worship team to worship leader to music director, all within since like April. It was, so at the time, just me on the keys, and then a harmonizing vocalist and a bass player that's been there since he was in school. So I was like, well, these people have been around for a long time and I have no idea what I'm doing. But they're like, you're just a youngin' coming in, and she doesn't know what she's doing. Lord, are you sure you put me here? Like, did I barge in? Like, did I barge in and put myself here, even though I didn't even apply for the position or anything. They're just like, here, it's yours. So, I mean, there was days I was bawling my eyes out, especially because in my piano lessons, I was very much sheet music, melody. And right when I joined, I just started learning about chord charts. And so I was like, how do I alter from melody to chords to also helping instruct these teammates, these bandmates that are looking to me for suggestions on how to go through a song. It was either on YouTube or Spotify, a podcast interview that you had done. But I was just like, hey, I kind of like this guy. Like it was just really full of knowledge. It was really helpful. And so I went ahead and followed the app, and then I noticed just all of the things that were so impactful and decided to continue with it. And I can't express enough how much of a huge impact it's been since then for the team too. And we just had practice last night and they were just raving. And since then, it's been awesome. I'm not saying God wouldn't have done this on it, but he also encouraged, like, if he wants a hole dug, I mean, if we want a hole dug, he's going to give us the shovel. And you know what I mean? And I feel like you were the shovel in that. It's helped build my confidence. A lot has happened, and a lot has happened within the team and within the church because of it. And I think because you base everything, it's not just your worship ministry training. It's not just music training, because from the tools that I've learned from WMT, we've been able to use those throughout, really bringing us together, and they see the improvements. They're seeing things and possibilities in it's really brought people together. So really it's been church-wide. I love the live. I love the videos. I love that you're a real person. You know what I mean? I love the community chat. I really enjoy seeing the Saturday set list because that brings in just a mix variety when we're kind of feeling like we're at a block. Looking on that to find inspiration has been really nice. The course documents have been epic. The team building skills have been amazing. We have training for our worship team now because we have so many people that are interested in it. So now I'm training people to come in. It's just been awesome. I'm probably just a quarter of the way in to everything that you have to offer, So I'm excited to see what else can happen. If you're thinking about joining the worship ministry training academy, do it. You'll just be filled with inspiration, just good godly information on how to focus on worshiping and bringing our excellences to the Lord. And you'll feel equipped to be able to do that.
If you'd like to join the Academy and get that kind of encouragement, coaching, and guidance, we would love to have you. It's just $1 to try. You get 15 days of full access to all of our courses, all of our live trainings, all of our expert interviews, our done-for-you documents, templates, and resources, plus a super supportive, great community. Hope to see you inside the Academy. Go to worshipministrytraining.com to start your $1 trial today.